This is a sort of devotional book. Lewis wrote it in the 1950s, towards the end of his life, and it's a very good book. On the last page of that book, Lewis makes what I consider to be the greatest argument for the immortality of the soul I've ever read. He even beats Plato. He says this: did you ever notice that we, oh, by the way, it was good to hear you say human again. I thought I was listening to Father Brochel, is that his name? Human being, right? He just died, didn't he, recently? Yes. That's what I thought. Actually, probably a lot of you knew him. But I love the way he said human being, anyways. You reminded me. You look like Ellen Burstyn, by the way, the actress. You reminded me. Anyway.
Father Groshel's friars are here.
Oh, really? Oh, okay, good. Okay. Is that you right there? Oh, there he is. Okay, good. Yeah, but I just love the way he said human. Anyway, but anyway, I just lost my train of thought. Okay, so why is it that we, as human beings, are continually surprised by the passage of time? We see somebody we haven't seen in 20 years. We go, "Ma, you've grown." No, I was going to say this short for the rest of my life, right? And it's look, I mean, okay, I've been teaching in HB. This is my 25th year, right? And when you're a professor, we get actually very few fringe benefits. One is that we get to park a little bit closer if we can find something, right? And to this day, every so often, I will pull into a faculty spot and I'll start to get out of the car and I'll say, "What if a policeman sees me and thinks I'm a student?" You know? But the thing is, it's not simple vanity, right? Do any of you really feel any older? We have a little more aches and pains, right? When, you know, we have 2 kids and they're now in college. It's like, when did that happen? They did a little end run around us. We just never accept it. And again, it's more than, you know, sometimes we fall prey to vanity, but it's more than vanity. I think there's something deep inside of us that says time should not have a tyranny over us. Right? It just doesn't seem to make sense. Why does it happen? It couldn't have gone by that fast. Again, this is my 25th year. I can't believe it. When did it happen? How did it happen? But here I am. Right? I feel like the same person, but I'm 25 years older. This is very, very strange. Now, the strange thing is not time. The strange thing is that we're surprised by the passage of time. I want you to understand, we have only known time in our life. Our whole life, all we've known is past, present, and future. And yet, we're never comfortable in time. Lewis says, that is a strange thing indeed. It would be like a fish being constantly surprised by the wetness of water. Right? Now that would be a strange thing, because water is the element in which a fish swims and lives. In the same way, time is the element in which we live. Or as a character in Star Trek said, time is the fire in which we burn. Do you remember that? That was one of the Star Trek movies. But again, so why are we surprised by it? And yet we are constantly surprised by it. And here's Lewis's kicker. And it's like I said, it's the last paragraph of the book. He says, it would be a strange thing indeed if a fish were to be continually surprised by the wetness of water, unless, of course, that fish were destined someday to be a land animal. Now, when I said that, you should have felt a little moment of joy, a frisson, as they say, right? You see, we're not made for time. We were made for eternity, and that's why we're never quite comfortable in time. It should not have the dominion over us. It does. But again, if we were simply material, physical creatures, the animals don't say, "Oh my, the time is going by," okay? They don't do that. "Oh my, you're getting old, aren't you?" It doesn't work like that. But it does in us. This is strange. Now, I would add my own to Lewis here. It's a little less strong, but I would argue in the same way we never accept. Here, let me just put it this way, because we're here in New York, and I am Greek, but you probably think I'm a Jewish comedian. I think I'm a Jewish comedian too. This doesn't start happening till you have kids, okay? But I defy anybody who's raised children, grandchildren, not to cry when they hear those words, "Where is the little girl I carried? Where is the little boy at play? I don't remember growing older. When did they? When did she get to be a beauty? When did he grow to be so tall? Wasn't it yesterday when they were small?" What's the next line she's crying over? Makes me cry too. Sunrise, sunset, it's Fiddler on the Roof, right? Again, that is so powerful. I remember the first time I saw it at a theater in Houston, and my kids were, and then I started crying. I don't remember crying when I was 18 or something, but I understood then, again, that time, it's a thief. What's going on? When did it happen? How did they get so big and so tall? It doesn't make sense, right? And we felt that. But I would argue, in the same way we don't accept the tyranny of time, I don't believe we ever accept the tyranny of space, right? Haven't you ever felt that way? Like you're sitting here at your desk and you're really, really thirsty and there's a glass of water over there. Haven't you felt that you should just be able to like throw out your arm like Mr. Fantastic and bring it back? Okay? Actually, that's what children are for. Hey, give me that water! That's why we have children. But it's weird. I don't think we ever quite accept the boundary. Now, I'm being only a little bit facetious. I think one of the great intimations of heaven is the remote control. Yeah, okay? Remote control. Now, I don't mean we're watching TV in heaven. Okay, we'll have better things to do. But think about what a remote control does. I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have them. Okay? I'm old. Do you remember for a while it changed the channels but not the volume?
I'm old enough to have already forgotten.
Oh my gosh. Hey, I'm going to tell you a secret that a lot of people don't know. This is actually true. My father, we grew up in New Jersey, my father had the first remote control in America. It was called my mother. Anyway, okay. I mean, that was our job to change the up and down, up and down. But again, I don't think we accept that. By the way, ladies, I want to make a plea to you right now. Please let your husband have the remote control. I want you to understand that in America today, everything has been taken away from us men. The last bastion of any sort of male leadership now is the remote control. So please let us have it, and you don't know how to use it right anyway, but please let us have it. I just remember the fights back and forth. But again, look, a lot of you know that one of the great arguments that a lot of apologists use today, and it's very powerful, and it goes back to an argument actually Pascal made. Pascal said that we all have a God-shaped vacuum inside of us. Think of Ecclesiastes. God has written eternity upon the hearts of men. We all have this God, and we try to fill it with all sorts of things. Bad things, even good things, but nothing fills it except Christ himself, right? It's like, remember when you were a kid, you had that little board, and it had a circle thing, and it had a square, and it had a diamond, and you had the blocks, and you had to put them in. Remember that? I don't know if you know, but that's actually the admission test to go to any of the California schools. Did you know that? That's what you have to do. Yeah. University of Southern California. That's you get in. You can do that. So I normally make an Aggie jokes. Have you ever heard of the Aggies? Yeah. See, you wouldn't know what that is. Oh, you're from Texas.
No, I'm a Davis Aggie.
A Davis Aggie, okay.
Davis Aggie.
Oh, so we doubly made fun of you there. Okay, that's good stuff. Oh my gosh. But so again, there is a yearning in us that cannot be filled by something that's simply physical and mechanical. All right, that's the argument. What I love about Lewis is he doesn't just make these arguments in the abstract. In many of his other works, he illustrates them, right? We want a story. Right? We want a story, not just kids, adults as well. Everything I've told you, Lewis incarnates it in the silver chair. Have any of you read that? That's one of the Chronicles of Narnia. Some of you? Okay. In the silver chair, some children from our world have been brought into Narnia by Aslan, the Lion King, to look for the lost prince. There's a prince named Rilian, and many years before he was kidnapped by this evil green witch and taken into Underland, her sort of underground kingdom where she's grooming him to be a tyrant to take over Narnia. Well, the kids find their way down into Underland, and they rescue Prince Rilian. They break the power of the silver chair, and they think we've won, and they're about to lead him and go back up to the surface, back up to Narnia, when the Green Witch catches them. Now, if this is the first time you're reading the book, you expect that the witch is going to zap them or do something or try to kill them. But no. She sees right away that they have been disenchanted, if you will. They know the truth. So instead, she goes over to the fireplace. She takes some green dust and throws it in there. And suddenly, the air in the room becomes heavy and languid. And then she takes out her mandolin and she begins to strum it rhythmically. Children, where are you going? We're going up there, up to Narnia. Up there? What do you mean by up there? This is all there is. No, Narnia. Up there, where the sun shines. Sun? What a pretty word. Do you mean anything by it? Sun? What is this sun? Well, you see that torch over there? Well, imagine if that torch got bigger and bigger and bigger and it hung from the ceiling. That's the sun. Oh, I see. We're playing a game. You looked at the torch and you imagined what it would be like if it was bigger, and you created this thing called sun. Oh, it's a very pretty game, children, but really you're much too old for games like that. Well, there's Aslan. What a strange name. What is Aslan? Well, he's a lion. Lion? What a peculiar word. Do you mean anything by it? Well, have you ever seen a cat? Why, yes. I love cats, because the evil villains always love cats. Oh, yes, I love cats. Well, imagine if the cat got bigger and bigger and it had a mane like a horse. That would be a... Oh, I see. We're playing the game again. Oh, children, you are much too old for such a game. It's time to leave your childish prattle away and become part of my world, the only world there is. Do you see what's happening here? In one sense, this is a reworking of Plato's allegory of the cave, but if it's possible, Lewis has gone one better than Plato. These are my men, Plato, Dante, C.S. Lewis. They all work together for me. Why do I say that? I think you all basically know the allegory of the cave. The allegory of the cave is basically, imagine that we've all grown up in this deep, dark cave, and all of us are in the cave, and we're all chained to these chairs, right? And behind us is a roaring fire, and in between our backs and the roaring fire are puppeteers carrying puppets, and the fire casts the shadow on the wall, and all of my life, all I've been seeing are the shadows on the wall, which are themselves shadows of shadows of shadows, because they're shadows of the puppets, which are shadows of the real things outside the cave. And I have come to believe this is reality. Do you understand why Lewis has done Plato one better? These kids did not grow up in the cave. They have seen the sun. They have felt its warmth on their face. They have met Aslan. They know his reality. I don't know if Lewis had this in mind, but you know what this is a metaphor for? This is a metaphor for a good Christian family. You sent your kid to Christian schools, maybe you homeschooled them, you invested 15 years to lead them in the straight and narrow, you work really, really hard, and then out of vanity, you send them to Harvard so they can destroy everything you did in about 2 months. You understand that? Okay? I'm fed up with the whole thing, okay? I'm just fed up with the whole thing. Right now, this is crazy now, okay? But at the very moment, the Harvards, the Princetons, the Yales, the Columbias, the Stanfords are throwing out the great classics. Believe it or not, it's back to school like where I teach, where we're reading the pagan classics again, okay? And I don't mean a Columbia frat boy when I say a pagan. I mean the Greeks and Romans, Homer, and Virgil, stuff like that. And they're coming back, okay? If you want a real education, you almost can't go to an Ivy League anymore. If you want to really learn something, if you want to learn the tradition in the past, why not? So, look at this. See, this is the craziness of our world. We know the reality, and yet in 5 minutes, the witch can make them believe that everything they know is real is just an illusion. This again is also a critique of Freud, who says that divine fatherhood is a reflection of human fatherhood, when the truth is the opposite. Okay? The things down here are the shadow. Now, Christians don't fully agree with Plato. This world is not literally a shadow, right? It's real. But compared to the thundering reality of heaven, it's like living in the Shadowlands, the last chapter of the Chronicles of Narnia. Right? So, again, our desires draw us towards God. But Lewis goes one more step, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a second argument, what I would call the argument by myth. Okay. In the first argument, Lewis is appealing to the individual desires and yearnings that we all have, right? All of us have this yearning, this desire that pushes us forward, okay? But if you take all of the desires of a people group, of a tribe, of a nation, right? If you take them all together, you know what you get? You get a myth. In some way, a myth is the waking dreams of a community. Right? So let's move beyond the individual dream to the corporate myth. Do those myths, what do they point to? Well, my guess is most of you in this room probably know that Lewis was an atheist for a long, long time before he became a believer. But what a lot of people don't know, a lot of people think that Lewis went directly from being an atheist to being a believer, sort of like Josh McDowell or Chuck Colson or many other, Lee Strobel. Many of these people have done this. But that's not what happened. Lewis first became a theist, a believer in God, and he stayed in that for 1 or 2 years. Depends on whether we agree with Alistair McGrath. He makes a pretty good case. We used to say 2 years is a new Lewis scholar that said maybe it was 1 year, but at least for a full year, Lewis was only a believer in God, but did not yet believe that Jesus was the Son of God. What was holding him back from believing in Jesus as the Son of God? It wasn't so much a logical argument. It was something to do with desire. You know, a lot of people like to say, Lewis was my role model. But I get to say that Lewis was my role model even more than some of you, because I'm also an English professor, right? So, I mean, it's kind of cool. I mean, he's in every area of my life, he's been a role model. And in one of the ways, too, because like Lewis, I've always had a deep love for mythology, especially Greek and Roman mythology, Norse a little bit less, but particularly Greek and Roman mythology. And Lewis loved mythology his whole life, studied it, knew it all. He was a big fan of a book that was, late Victorian book called The Golden Bough by Sir James Frazer. Now that's very little known today, but do any of you here remember a guy named Joseph Campbell? Is that name familiar? Remember that long interview with Bill Moyers and stuff like that? I don't know if you know it, but he had a huge influence on George Lucas and the Star Wars trilogy. Okay. Well, if you know a little bit about Joseph Campbell is what we call a comparative anthropologist, or you can call him a comparative mythologist, where he looks at all the myths and rituals of all the different tribal groups across time and tries to look for parallels. And I love reading this stuff. It's fascinating. Well, Sir James Frazer did this long before, right? And one of the things that Frazer did that made him so famous is he drew out a certain archetype. An archetype is a certain type of character or event that has cross-cultural significance. I don't care what culture you go to, Australia, Japan, America, wherever, you will find the archetype of the wise old man. Whether we call him Obi-Wan Kenobi or Gandalf or the sensei in a Chinese martial arts movie or in a Western or something like The Magnificent Seven, the wise man that teaches you all these things, or Kung Fu. You remember Kung Fu? Little grasshopper, right? All the way back then. We recognize the type across culture. Well, he identified a type that he called the Corn King. Now, question, does anybody know what a British person means when he says corn? He means wheat. Okay, it's very confusing. If he wants to say wheat, if he wants to say corn, he says maize. So this is very confusing. I teach the Victorian age, and they had this thing called the Corn Laws. But the Corn Laws determine the trading of wheat, not the trading of corn. So keep that in mind. So we would say wheat king or the corn king. Okay. He noticed that in all the different cultures that he studied, ancient and even some of the modern tribal groups, okay, like people from Brooklyn, modern tribal groups, he noticed that they all had this type that he called the Corn King. It was a semi-divine figure, a sort of son of the gods, who came down to earth, in some way or another died, and returned to the heavenly sphere. And it was all wrapped up in some way or another with taboo sins, right? You understand taboo guilt? Even the ancient Greeks, who had gods that were not holy, understood that there were certain taboo sins that brought sort of guilt or blood guilt upon the community. That was understood and is understood by all different tribal groups. Even if they don't have a holy god, they understand that there is a breach that has occurred because of these. And there are stories, various stories, of gods coming to the earth. Now, if you are a Greek, you call the Corn King Osiris, or you call him Bacchus. If you are Egyptian, you call him I'm sorry, I said it wrong. I'm sorry. The Greek is Adonis or Bacchus. If you're Egyptian, you call him Osiris. If you are Babylonian, you call him Tammuz. If you are Persian, you call him Mithras. If you are a Norseman, you call him Balder. To a certain extent, if you're Hindu, you might call him Rama, or you might call him Krishna. Okay? Throughout, there is this understanding. Now, that sounds a lot like Jesus. And Fraser basically believed that Jesus was just the Hebrew version of the Corn King. He couldn't say that out loud because he was a Victorian. Joseph Campbell had no problem saying that out loud. But he still believed the same thing Joseph Campbell did. It's just the Hebrew version of the Corn King and no different. And Lewis said, what does the death of an obscure Jewish rabbi 2,000 years ago have anything to do with me? It's just a myth. And a lot of people think the desires we have are only for myths and that's it. But no. Behind the desire, behind the myth, is something real. But before Lewis could understand that, he needed a little help from his good friend, J.R. Tolkien. I hope you all know he was a very strong, committed Catholic for his life, and infused that in The Lord of the Rings and many of the other works he wrote. And have any of you ever been to Magdalen College, Oxford? I know Jim's been there. Oh, good. You have to go. If you go there, they charge you to even walk into Magdalen College. It's just really bad. I don't know. Anyway, and a lot now. But there's a thing called Addison's Walk, this beautiful tree-lined walk around a deer park. And Lewis and his friends used to love to walk around that park again and again, late into the evening. If you do that here, well, you take your life in your hands. But anyway, is it safer here?
Yeah.
Because I just went to London and it was safe. It's because Big Brother is watching every single thing you're doing. That's why. Is Big Brother watching here?
You're confusing us with Jersey.
Oh, I know. Jersey, what are we going to do? My brother went to school in Hoboken. You ever heard of Stevens Institute of Technology? I am not making a joke. There was a period when he was a student that they were thinking about changing the name to Stevens Hoboken Institute of Technology. If you think about the acronym, you'll figure out why last minute they decided no. Poor Hoboken, they gave Frank Sinatra an honorary degree from a engineering school, and I think they expected money. I don't think they got any money, but they probably got a signed record or something. But anyway, Jersey, oh my gosh, what a place. Are you listening for my accent? Not too bad. It's when I say the word daughter or water. That's when you catch me. Catch me there. So anyway, as they walked around and around, they were discussing this very issue about Christ just being a myth. And then Tolkien said the words that changed Lewis's life. Jack, he said, did you ever consider maybe the reason Jesus sounds like a myth is because he is the myth that became fact? When he heard that, everything changed, right? Look, if the Bible's right, we are all created in the image of one God. Why is it that every single culture has this yearning and desire for this corn king? It seems to be because that desire was put in us, right? Well, doesn't it make sense if that desire is in us, that when God himself does it, he'll do it in a way that answers our yearning? You see, all the other myths and legends are signposts, glimpses that point ahead to the reality that is to come. You know, it's been a long time since they taught history in public school. Even I'm 50. When I was a kid, it was social studies, which is not history. Sorry if you're a social studies teacher, but it's not history. And I'll bet you all had that same teacher I did. She taught us the Epic of Gilgamesh, the wonderful Epic of Gilgamesh, that has a flood story. And then she just told us what she'd been taught. She told us, you know, children, we now know that every ancient culture has a story of a global flood. Therefore, children, the story of Noah is just a myth and nothing more. And even as a young kid, I remember thinking to myself, now wait a minute, there's another way of reading the evidence, okay? There's data, and then there's the interpretation of data. If every single, this includes the Aborigines in Australia, the Native Americans in America, they all have a story of a universal flood. If every single culture has that story, maybe there was a flood, okay? Maybe there's something behind it. That's just another way of reading the facts. Maybe it happened, and maybe in all the other cultures it retained only mythic value, but only in the Bible did it retain something of a historical nature, right? Or look, if you read a book on Darwinism, they'll show you what's called homology, right? If you look at a human arm, a bat wing, a dorsal fin, right? They all look very similar. And they say, look at this is proof of evolution. Well, maybe, but it also suggests maybe a common designer. You know, like if I'm an architect, I'm not going to keep reinventing the 90-degree angle, okay? I'm not going to keep reinventing, right? So it depends. I mean, so you've got data and you've got an interpretation of data. Well, one thing is to say Jesus is just a myth, but wait a minute. Maybe Jesus is the myth that came true, right? Let me read you. It's in your handout there. Lewis later on wrote an essay called "Myth Became Fact," and it's in a book called "God in the Dock," which is probably the best collection of essays for apologetics, probably the best collection of essays. And this is what Lewis says in there. It's B3. The heart of Christianity, he says, is a myth, which is also a fact. The old myth of the dying God, without ceasing to be myth, comes down from the heaven of legend and imagination to the earth of history. We pass from a Balder or an Osiris dying nobody knows when or where, to a historical person crucified, it is all in order, under Pontius Pilate. This doesn't happen in some mythic time and space. Nobody tries to date Osiris or Adonis or any. That's in mythic space, right? But here it happened in a real time, in a real place, under Pontius Pilate. It actually happened. Now, some people think, oh my gosh, then why did God allow all of these other stories? Aren't they going to confuse us? I would argue, along with Lewis, that the existence of all these other Corn King myths actually strengthens my faith in the reality of Christ. Why? Because if Jesus came into the world and it was completely foreign to us, like nothing anyone had ever desired or dreamed or longed for, it would appear that a foreign God had invaded us. But when we look at it, we realize that yes, now the desire of all ages is being met. Right? You know, it's not like until the coming of Jesus, God spoke to the Jews only and ignored everybody else. Okay? Now, he only spoke what we call special revelation to the Jews, but did he ignore the rest of the people? No. He gave the rest of the world, the Gentiles, what the theologians call general revelation. As Lewis says, before the coming of Jesus, God spoke to us in three ways. He spoke through nature, he spoke through our conscience, and he says he spoke through the good dreams of the pagans. Right? Those strange stories about God's coming to earth. This was us, man, yearning with our senses divinitatis, our sense divine, yearning and reaching and inventing these stories, most of which are marred by violence and horror, but still, in them is a seed of truth. And doesn't it make sense that when God comes to the earth, he would do it in a way that would fulfill those higher yearnings? Look, if you're a Christian, you believe that Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament law and prophets. But I would also argue, along with Lewis and so many others, Chesterton, Milton, Dante, I would also argue that not only did Jesus fulfill the Old Testament law and prophets, he fulfilled the higher yearnings of the pagan people. Right? They all come together. But here's the good news, Lewis says. Jesus is more than Balder, because he is in fact real and historical. But even though he's more than Balder, he is not therefore less than Balder. What does that mean? That means with Jesus we have a real salvation enacted in time and space, but we also have a story, a myth that speaks to our imagination and our desire and yearning. So he's not less than, he's more than. This is what the world needs to hear, an end to their yearning, right? People want to say, our desire, myth, that's it. No, the myth points to something real and historical. Let me end by saying a few things. This is kind of my own way of explaining this. Let me make a statement that may shock you. Christianity is not the only truth. What a thing to say. I might get fired from my university. But let me say it again. Christianity is not the only truth, but it's the only complete truth. The distinction is important. If we say Christianity is the only truth, it's like we're dropping a wall and everything outside of Christianity is darkness and error and deception. But no, we are created in God's image, and though we are fallen and depraved, we still maintain the imago Dei, the image of God. And we still yearn for God. And you will find bits and pieces of truth in every culture, in every religion. Okay? You will find some truth there. But it's a partial truth. Right? It's just a glimmer. It's a candle in the darkness. But it's a real truth. But only in Jesus himself, not even the Bible, but Jesus himself, do we find truth in its absolute, pure, and complete form. The one who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Again, those of you that are about my age, a little bit older, you'll probably remember in the 70s, a very, very common a metaphor was, well, truth is on the top of the hill, and there's lots of ways around it. I would actually completely accept that. There is truth at the top of the hill. It's the guy who said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Think of the famous statue